You're listening to the Reinvest Podcast, where each Tuesday we show business owners and entrepreneurs how to reclaim, reconnect, and refocus their life by bringing you the top real estate professionals in the industry. We'll help you diversify into real estate by equipping you with the tools and tactics to build generational wealth. Your hosts, Garrett Gatton and Seth Ciminillo. All right. Well, thank you guys for joining in to another episode of the Reinvest Podcast, episode number 85. This is a little bit different. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see that I am down a co-host right now. He is okay, but if you didn't know, Seth had surgery at the time of this recording a few days ago, and he is down an appendix and has learned some other stuff, but he is going to be on the mend and back on the saddle, but that will not deter us. So we are going to have a great episode today, and joined with us, our guest is Annie Dickerson with Goodegg Investing. How are you, Annie?
I'm wonderful. Sad to hear that Seth is now one appendix down, but great to be here with you, Garrett.
Well, what's funny is he and I are actually in the same category now because my appendix was taken from me against my will at age 12. And it was taken against my will, but it did save my life. So it is kind of a wild ride that way. It's always weird. You're like that you have an organ that's kind of optional. I don't understand how that works, but
yeah.
We're
gonna have a point. It must have served some purpose.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and it's crazy. They still don't know. There's a lot of mystery around an appendix, which is kind of funny. But well, Annie, excited to have you on today. Admittedly, I've just kind of seen you. We've been on parallel paths in some ways in the last few years. Seen your involvement in the Best Ever Conference a few years back, and since then, you guys have come a long way. So, give us a little bit of an origin story to yourself, Goodegg Investing, and what you guys are doing, and then we'll jump in today's episode.
Yeah. Well, as for me personally, the first thing you should know about me is I never intended to get into real estate. It was the farthest thing. And in fact, at one point, I even physically crossed it off my list of potential things that I was going to get into. I started out as a fourth grade teacher with Teach for America and had big goals for closing the achievement gap and the opportunity gap. I taught in the inner cities, right outside of DC, Washington, DC. And my passion was really for impact, and it always had been. And so much so that I left the classroom because I felt like the impact I was having wasn't big enough. And so I went to go make educational games. I went back to school to study game design, which was hilarious. Video games.
Educational video games.
Yes.
You are officially the coolest person ever.
I'll have to tell my kids that later. They'll love that. But I wanted to make educational games because I wanted to, and this will come back later in my story, I wanted to kind of hit people with like a sneak attack. Like I wanted them to learn without really knowing that they were learning, because I knew that that's where they would get hooked and engaged, and they would play over and over for a long time. And so it's funny that I went to game design school because the last game that I had played prior to going to game design school was Super Mario Brothers.
Oh, wow.
It was real bad. I had very little experience, but I had a vision for what I wanted to do. And I was in school with all these guys who had basically had a controller attached to their hands.
What
since
platform
birth.
Would that have been on? Was that a Nintendo 64?
Which one? The
Super Mario Brothers, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I had a Super Nintendo. That was the last thing that I had played on. I had never used an Xbox, PlayStation, no idea. And so we'd be in these game design labs, and you'd watch the screens of the other people in my class playing these third person shooters or whatever. And you watch, and their characters are all making these tight turns, and they were sniper quality. They get their targets every time. My character is walking across the screen, and the head is bobbing up and down like this because I can't get the hang of the two thumbsticks. It was a huge learning curve. But that's another area of my story, is that I've always not been afraid to put myself in situations outside my comfort zone.
Right.
so that I could have that impact and so that I could drive toward that vision. And so I made educational games for a little bit, and then I got into instructional design, creating gamified trainings for companies.
Oh,
So still,
wow.
we're still not at the real estate part yet. And
Right.
in fact, when we moved to the Bay Area where we are now, my husband, who had been in tech before, all of a sudden said, "Honey, I think I'm going to go into real estate." And I said, "What?" And apparently, because we had been house hacking along the way, he had developed sort of this passion for real estate. And
Hmm.
I thought, all right, well, you go give it a shot. But as soon as he anchored in and he knew that he wanted to do real estate, I looked down my list and I was like, well, I'm going to cross real estate off my list. We can't both be in real estate. That
Right,
would be
right.
ridiculous. Can't be that couple. So I continued down my path and climbing the corporate ladder. But what I saw, because I had not grown up with any entrepreneurs, any
Mm,
real estate investors,
right.
none of that. I didn't have any of that experience. But what I saw was my salary was here. Year one, he was way down here.
Dead
Year
weight.
two,
Yeah.
year two, he got a little bit closer. Year three, he surpassed me. And I'm like, what is going on here? And what happened was a couple years in, he was starting to see success. He asked me for help with his business. I very reluctantly agreed, which meant I read a book. But I,
What was the book,
in
just out of
doing so,
curiosity?
I think it was a Gary Keller book.
Okay, the $1 million real
Uh,
estate investor or something.
yeah, something like that.
Okay.
But in the process, I stumbled across his website and I realized that because I had experience in design, I realized that that was something that I could do. And
Mm-hmm.
so I redesigned his whole website. And in the process, I realized he wanted to help other fledgling real estate investors like us who are starting out with maybe small rentals or house hacking.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I built up his content, I realized, wait a second, I don't want to be working this job. I want to be doing these rental properties.
Interesting.
And
So you're doing all this for Gary
yeah,
Keller, or you're doing it for your husband?
for my husband's business at the
Your
time.
husband's business. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I had no intention of starting my own business. I was just, as I learned more about the rental properties, I thought, oh, maybe this is something I can do. Because between the teaching, the game design, and the instructional design, I had had 9 jobs in the 10 years after college.
Wow,
And
that's dizzying.
so I was exhausted. I
Oh yeah.
was ready to settle down. All my friends were like, what's wrong with you? Why can't you hold down a job? And I was like, I Um, but you know, through this real estate path, I saw an opportunity. The wheels started turning, and I said, wait a minute. You're telling me if I invest in X number of rental properties, each cash flowing this amount per month,
Yeah.
that I could replace my salary. Nobody had ever run that concept by me before.
Right, right. Well, what's interesting for myself, I almost feel like I spoiled is not the right word, but I went from knowing nothing about investing and anything business related because I came from more of like a nonprofit background, more of a ministry
Mm,
background. And so when I stepped into real estate, it was also simultaneously the first
yeah.
time I learned about investing in general. So I didn't know
Mm,
about like the stock market versus real estate or different assets versus real estate. So I was just like, oh, yeah, cool. Investing means that you have cash flow and that someone else pays down your debt and builds equity for you. Well, then kind of backwards, you start realizing other people's touch points and they're like, hey, this is not normal. I'm used to like putting money into a 401k and just not being involved with it or investing in an asset that's not leverageable. And then you're like, oh, wait a minute. That's a big deal. You can't leverage the assets that you're investing in. Well, why would you do that? So
yeah.
it is really kind of crazy just how powerful real estate is. It sounds like you were starting to put those pieces together kind of through your husband's experience and then you were
Mm-hmm.
discovering it for yourself.
Exactly, exactly. And so, at that point, because we had been house hacking for a number of years, we called our house hacks or all of our properties, we started collecting the alphabet. So our first house hack in DC was Alpha. Then we had Bravo, then Charlie and Delta
Oh,
here in the
no
Bay
way.
Area. And our goal was to get all the way to Zulu by the time we
Wow.
retired. That was our big goal.
26
And
properties across the
right,
country. Yeah.
yeah, that was our goal.
That's cool.
And as soon as I dug into this real estate investing stuff for real, I realized we could be moving at a much faster pace if we were to look outside of the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
And so we started investing out of state and very quickly amassed a small portfolio of, I think, around 25 doors in
Where
Huntsville,
did
Alabama.
Huntsville? Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
What made you pick Huntsville?
Yeah. Well, when you look outside of your immediate area, basically there's so many different places. So I pulled out a whole map, the United
Mm-hmm.
States. I said, well, where do we even begin? I don't even know. So thankfully, I read a great book, Dave Lindahl's book, Emerging Real Estate Markets.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And
I've heard of
in
that.
it,
I've not read it though.
yeah, he outlines, I think, 10 or 12 different criteria you should look for it that would make a market considered an emerging market. So he goes beyond the job growth, job diversity, population growth, landlord friendly, and he really gets into the nitty gritty of why a market would emerge.
Mm.
And one thing that put Huntsville at the top of our list was not only the affordability of living there
Right.
and the job growth that was coming, but this, he called it a physical barrier to growth. So that's why markets like San Francisco and New York do really well, because as the economy there grows, you can't build into the ocean. There's a natural
Right.
barrier.
Right.
But most of these landlocked states, they don't have that same physical barrier to growth in the Midwest and the Southeast.
Yeah.
But Huntsville, what was unique about Huntsville is that it's got this huge swath of land, kitty corner to downtown Huntsville, that's called the Redstone Arsenal. And if you look at it on a map, it's huge.
Mm.
And it's government land. And so there's all sorts of government, there's military there, there's FBI there, rockets there, all sorts of things, but it's government land. So they can't build any housing there. And so I put two and two together and I said, well, there's all these jobs coming to this quiet, sleepy, small town,
Interesting.
and they're not going to be able to build past this
So
point.
there's already a
So
built-in supply
sooner or
issue.
later, exactly. So that's
Wow.
what put it over the edge for us. And we bought our first property in Huntsville. It was a sixplex, sight unseen,
Oh my
on
gosh.
LoopNet, where
Oh,
deals
no
go to
way.
die. Yes.
Wow. Where deals go to die. That's
Yep.
hilarious. What year was that?
That was 2017.
20. Wow, that was a great time. I mean, that's before things
Yeah.
went bonkers. And
Yep.
didn't the FBI just move that to be their national headquarters in the last year or two?
Oh, yeah. There's huge stuff happening in
That's
Huntsville. People
wild.
actually know what Huntsville is
Yeah.
now. They
Right.
didn't when I first started investing there.
Wow.
But you know what it did was it got my foot in the door as far as the possibilities of investing in real estate
Mhm.
outside of my local market. And we had some ups and downs. I mean, it wasn't all roses, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. But what it did was it ignited this passion in me.
Yeah.
And every time we'd get together with friends and family, they'd be like, Annie, what are you up to? And I'd say, oh my gosh, I'm looking at this property. I've been underwriting it. But,
What a baller you sound like, because that's like 99% of people. You'd never expect that to come out of their mouth. What did you
right?
do over the weekend? Well, I went to Huntsville and I canvassed an area and I have
Yeah.
an LOI on 3 properties.
Yep. And so all of them were like, oh my gosh, I want to do that too. Can you teach me how to do it? And so, of course, I'd say, yeah. The teacher and me, right? I'd say, yeah, come sit down. I'll teach you how to do it. And go down all the steps,
Did you gamify it for him?
Market,
You're playing
I should
Monopoly.
have.
There you go. It's already done for you.
I really should have. I tried to walk them through it, but maybe because I didn't gamify it, their eyes would glaze over. And I'd be like, oh, no, that sounds exhausting. They're like, no, I don't want to do the work. You misunderstand. I just have this pile of money and I want to put this into real estate, but I don't want to do any of that work. Could you do the work for me? And I was like, at the
What an
time, I was
interesting
like,
question. Yeah.
no, I don't do that. I only do my
Yeah.
own properties and they're pretty small. So there's not really a whole lot of room.
How many
And
times
you
did
know
you
what?
get asked
Good
that
luck.
question before it started to like, yeah, wait a minute, am I looking at this wrong?
Mm-hmm. A fair number, a fair number of times. It wasn't just the first or the second one. It was many of these conversations. And then it hit me on the head. And I was like, wait a second. I know a lot of people with the same problem.
Right.
I said, if I could just figure out how to solve this one problem for them, I can help all of these people.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so that's when I started to dig. And the most I knew at that point was a JV, a joint venture partnership. And I thought
Mm-hmm.
maybe if I could figure out a JV with one or two investors, that could work. So I started to look into that, the legalities of that. That was definitely not my strong suit, but I tried to figure it out because, again, I had that passion for impact and wanted to help people solve their problems. And that's when digging, deeper, 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 that's when I discovered syndications, these group investments.
Mm-hmm.
And my first impression, well, not impression, but my first thought as I dug in and I discovered what they were and the possibility and the potential around syndications was I was so outraged because I had been investing in real estate for over 10 years at that point, and nobody had ever given me the easy button to say I
Right.
could
Mm-hmm.
invest passively. I didn't know that was an option. I thought it was be a landlord or bust.
Right.
But when I discovered this, I said, why don't they teach this more? Why isn't this more publicly available so that people know they don't have to be a landlord
Which is
to
funny
invest
because
in real estate?
shortly after you probably asked that question, it started to become more mainstream,
Yes.
which is interesting. I feel like kind of the trend now is democratizing different investment vehicles, strategies, kind of industry disruptive things. That's the trend. And I think social media has been a huge variable in
Yeah.
that becoming possible, and
Yeah.
syndication was like, wait a minute, this was kind of, private equity, hedge fund type
Right.
investment grade. You had to be a very high net worth individual to even consider putting money in a real estate investment. And then it got democratized and people were like,
Mm-hmm.
wait a minute, the retail investor that's like, I'm climbing the corporate ladder. I've got a nice house and I have a disposable income. What do I do with this? And so what was, talk about that. So Goodegg kind of formed, right? And
Mm-hmm.
one of the taglines that we were talking about that you guys have really, your ethos is, a life by design. How were you able to take that concept and marry that with some of the people that were interested in doing what you were doing?
So, as I started to dig into syndication and realized it was a viable path, I decided to quit my job with no safety net. So, I was working as a creative director at the time. I quit my job in January of 2018, having never done a syndication before, having never raised capital before. But I figured one way or the other, I'm going to figure this out. And so, thankfully, the universe was like, all right, I got your back. So, the week after I quit my job, I went to the best ever conference. And that is where I met my business partner, Julie. And she and I really hit it off from that early conversation about our passion
Mm,
for a couple of things. One is helping other women and moms to get into real estate because we saw it as a great path for these busy moms to be able to contribute financially
yeah.
beyond their jobs, or if they were stay at home moms, to be able to contribute financially. And two is this concept of a life by design. Because from day one, Julie and I, both being busy moms, we were never, I'm not one of those real estate geeks who's like, oh, let me take a look at that spreadsheet. Let me get in there with that IRR. Show me that sensitivity analysis. I mean, we've learned all that over time, but it was never really about all of that for us.
Right,
It was
right.
about using this real estate investment as a vehicle to help us to get to whatever life it is that we wanted with our kids and our families and travel and our businesses. And so that's kind of the path that we set out to create with Goodegg, is to show people that real estate is a vehicle, it's a tool for you to help to grow your wealth so that you can then live this life by design. And by design, we mean, that you create, that you decide exactly what your life looks like, rather than the life by default that so many people live, where their blinders on, their heads down, they're working 9 to 5 for 40 years.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the movie The Italian Job?
Yes, I love that movie
So
with the little Coopers that
yeah, the little
go in
Mini
and
Coopers that
yeah.
are like zipping in there carrying like
Yeah.
500 pounds of gold. Well, what's interesting is that bad guy, he, they had this big score, coming into a bunch of money. He betrays everybody, takes their investment. You catch up with him later, and you realize that he had cherry picked all of someone else's ideas, right? Like the thing that they were going to spend their money on, because he didn't know
Yeah,
what
that's
he
right.
wanted, right? So he did not have a life by design.
Yeah.
And so many times you put your head down, and I think even people make one misnomer is like, okay, well, there's money in real estate, so I'm going to go there. And really, that's just like kind of like at the surface. And there's more to be asked and drilled down into. One of the things that you guys, sounds like you do well, is educate people. And you were telling me that sometimes, money is the symptom, right? I have this money, what do I do with it? And you have to kind of coach people to figure out maybe even some deeper stuff they haven't considered yet.
Exactly. The money is always, I consider it such a fortunate thing that we as humans have this thing called money as this low-lying, like fairly easy, straightforward problem to solve, right? It's like dollars and cents. It's money. It's black and white. It's in the context of everything in life, it's actually fairly straightforward. I know it takes up like most people's thoughts and worries. However, it is actually pretty straightforward. And so but most people think it's really complex. So that's why they come to us and they're like, I don't know what to do with my money. I feel guilty that I'm not doing more, or I'm scared that I'm going to put it in the wrong place, or I've lost money before, And so they come to us presenting with these money symptoms. And usually when they first come to us, they're not thinking about the ideal life that they want to live, that they want to travel for a year with their family, that they have this passion project that they want to turn into a business. They're just like, I just have this money. My savings account is, been idle, sitting there. And so what we do is we first help them with the symptom at hand. And so we say, okay, well, let's get you into something. Let's help you make sure you understand all the risks and the potential here so that you can make the right decision with your money. Okay, now that we've got that squared away, what we've found is once they have that immediate money problem resolved, it's not like people are automatically like, woo, I'm so happy now. I'm overjoyed. This was everything that I wanted.
Because it wasn't the
They're like,
problem, yeah.
No. Either they come up with another money problem, or they say, well, that wasn't it. I'm still kind of unhappy. I'm still feeling anxious. And so that's what we've tried to do, is beyond just educating people on real estate and how this works, but really showing people, inspiring them, motivating them to take action. And even if all they do is take, a few minutes to envision what that life that they want is, that gets them way closer. And then they can work backwards, because the money part, like I said, is actually easier to solve for.
Yeah, it's cool to see those aha moments kind of come on for people, and maybe be challenged to consider something that they hadn't before.
Yeah.
And it's cool too, there's not one right answer for, what you want your life to look like and have real estate serve that purpose. I mean, for us, like, our goal would be to be in a position where job optional, right? Because at the end of the day, everybody needs purpose. That never goes away. And I think even corporate America and some of our cultural perceptions towards retirement is like, man, if I can just get to retirement and have this much, then I'll be fine. And I won't work anymore. And at the end of the day, this is weird. If you watch people when they retire, especially if that's their mindset towards retirement, often shortly after they retire, they're antsy, their health goes down. I mean, there's like a lot of things that, they're depressed. There's this vacuum of like, man, what do I do? Because for so long, my work was my identity, or whatever that was. And So we have some really warped views towards retirement. You always have to have purpose. So you're either going to answer it now or you're going to answer it later.
Yep.
And if you answer it now, you can, like you said, design things so that it'll serve what you want to get out of life,
Yeah.
So that's great.
Exactly.
So, okay, we are going to pivot and we're going to go into one of our show segments here. We call this our smaller pockets. So, Annie, this is the part of our show where instead of the bigger pockets, which we've been talking about so far, we're going to get into a painful story in real estate, because if you do it long enough, it's a matter of when, not if, you're going to have, some kind of challenge or obstacle. So let's pick something that you've been a part of or something that didn't go well. And what'd you learn from it?
Oh, boy. Well, I have actually more stories here than I care to count. But every one of them was a very hard-earned lesson. We paid tuition, but we're better investors for it now.
Yeah.
And so this one that I'm going to share happened fairly early on, when we were investing we had invested in a fourplex in Huntsville. And I had followed all the advice on Bigger Pockets, and on the podcast I was listening to, I did all the underwriting, and on paper, everything was looking so good. In actuality, there was more than one tenant of that fourplex who wasn't paying. And one person in particular, because in Alabama, as we found out, the laws are such that the previous owner doesn't actually have to disclose all the information unless you ask specifically.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
I know. So we had to learn the hard way that we had to ask all the right questions. So we inherited this one tenant who hadn't been paying for even before we bought the property. And so at the time, I was not the savvy investor and business owner I am now. And so, she said, I got a car accident. I lost my job, all these things. And I said, no problem. Yeah. One more month.
Right.
And finally, 1 month, I put my foot down. I told my property manager, look, we need to evict her. And so we went down that path. And the day before the sheriff was going to show up, my property manager calls me. She says, well, I got good news and bad news. She said, well, the good news is she's left. And I said, okay, that's something. What's the bad news? And she said, well, the bad news is before she left, she stopped up all the sinks and the tubs in her unit. She left the water running and then she took off. So by the time anybody knew what was happening, she had flooded not only her unit, but the unit next door to that and the one next door to that. So three of 4 units in this fourplex.
Wow.
This was summer in Huntsville, very humid. Mold. And I had very young kids at the time. I think there were 4 and 1.
And you're in San Francisco?
Yeah.
Wow.
So I spent that whole summer on the phone with my property manager, on the phone with insurance, trying to figure out this whole process, filling out paperwork. I didn't even realize that because of the humidity, it would take weeks for these units to dry out before they could even fix them. So, I mean, we didn't have any cash flow from that property for many months, not to mention that because of the way I learned that insurance works, you have to actually front the money first to make the repairs, and then you get reimbursed. So we were out of pocket probably $40,000-$50,000 to fix these 3 units before we got reimbursed. Whew.
Wow. There's so much there. First of all, how do you keep yourself from being jaded? Because I know exactly what you're thinking. You got big ideals. You're excited about real estate for a lot of reasons. And one of them is to provide a quality product for your tenants and your residents. And you assume the best, right? And you want to work with people, especially that, then you talk to people, and there's 2 types of real estate investors that have been doing it for a long time. There are those who are wise and still have an open heart towards people, and those who are jaded. How do you keep from being the latter?
Ooh, that's an excellent question. I mean, I think, look, out of those 4 units, only one of them was one that we were going to evict. That means that there were still 3 people
Yeah.
not paying consistently every month, but trying their hardest and
Sure.
doing their best. And not to mention all of our other properties where it's not like we didn't have issues, but most of the people were good standing citizens and
Hmm.
trying to pay on time. And so what it did was this situation didn't jade me. It amused me a little bit in hindsight. Not at the time. I was not amused at the time, but after a while, it amused me. But um, rather than jade me, and I think this comes to your kind of outlook on life and how you take the feedback and failures in your life, is that I didn't see it as, oh my gosh, this is just the wrong path for me. This is not worth it. It's never
Right.
going to work.
Right.
I took the situation as feedback and I said, well, here are the things that I could have controlled in this situation that I could have done a better job in. And
Sure.
I definitely dropped the ball in that due diligence early on. And here's what I've learned from the insurance, from working with property managers, with this eviction process, which I hadn't gone through before. And so, with that, what do I want to do with that information? And then I said, well, I really don't want to go through another situation like this, especially with young kids. This is not the phase of my life to be getting random phone calls from my property
Yeah.
manager that could completely turn my whole summer upside
How
down.
old were your kids, you said?
4 and 1.
So it's not like you could look at your 4-year-old and you want to be like, listen, I had a business deal. I need you
Yeah.
guys to work with me a little bit. Mommy's going to be a little
Yep.
distracted. Like that
Yep.
doesn't exist.
Nope. Nope.
Oh man,
It
that's
was
good.
just, yeah, it was just, I mean, you have normal mom guilt anyway. This just compounded that
Compound. Yeah. Right.
because here I am.
It's
I
supposed
had
to
to spend
be.
extra time on my computer on the phone away from the kids. They're pounding on the phone wanting to play with me. I
Yeah.
couldn't do it.
Right.
And so what it taught me was this isn't the right, it's not that real estate wasn't the right thing. It
Yeah.
was that this way that I was investing in real estate and these assets and maybe this market wasn't the right fit for me at that time in my life.
If you're listening to this, that's really profound because a lot of the time, the conclusions that we draw from something that didn't go right are wrong conclusions, and they feel right, right? Like it's like, oh, well, maybe this isn't right for me, or maybe I shouldn't buy in Huntsville, or it's like drawing the right conclusions are so pivotal. You took ownership of the situation; it made you a better investor moving forward. You can't get around that. That's life in general. So awesome. Good stuff. Okay, we're going to go into our next show segment called our little nugget. All right, Andy, I'm a sucker for the air horn. Admittedly, I don't go to many clubs because I have 6 kids. Even if I didn't, I don't know if I go to clubs, but I do like the sound of an air horn, so it's on our show. Our little nugget it could be something very practical, a hack, or something very principled that you kind of operate your business by, but something you can impart to our listeners that they can take away.
This is going to be a super, super simple one, but sometimes the most profound changes come from the simplest things. Back about 18 months ago, we were probably in our 5th or 6th year of business at that point, and things were going well. We were growing and we were hiring, the team was growing, we were building systems and everything. But it meant that I was on meetings a lot. I was on a lot of meetings and coaching calls and partner calls. And you'd look at my calendar about 18 months ago and you'd see on a good day, 7 back-to-back meetings in a single day.
Wow.
And it was nuts. And what I would do is, often there'd be podcasts or recordings and whatnot. So I have in my house, even though I live in the Berkeley Hills with these sweeping views of the Bay Area and floor to ceiling windows in almost every room, but my podcast studio is this little closet in our guest room. And it's perfect because the sound doesn't bounce around in here, and there's no windows, and it's just the right lighting and setup. But what would happen is I would get caught in here for 7-8 hours a day in this tiny little space and not go outside and see the sunshine. And so what I committed to do was, even if it meant that I was a minute or two late for a meeting, I committed to taking that time for myself. And all I had to do was walk the 20 feet from where I'm sitting right now to my front door, pop out my front door, and just stand there for a minute and take a few breaths.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found was I was looking for more space because in my day. I didn't feel like, even though I had built this amazing business and we were helping all these people, I personally felt like I was right back in that job. And I didn't feel like I
Mm-hmm.
had that freedom and flexibility that I really wanted. And a funny thing happened because as I started, it's not like I changed anything else in my day. I still had all the meetings, but the only difference I made was I would go outside, or
Mm-hmm.
I would go into the kitchen and get a cup of coffee or whatever. But I would change it up so that I wasn't just glued to this seat for 8 hours straight.
Right.
And I think what it did was it opened up some part of my mind to start thinking about, well, how can I get out of this seat more often?
Oh,
What are
wow.
the meetings
Yeah.
where it's critical for me to be here? And
Yeah.
how can I get out into the habit of moving around and putting myself in a better space, both mentally and physically, so that I can do my best work?
Yeah.
And so now you look at my calendar, I maybe have 7 meetings in a week. And what it does is it frees my time up and my mental space up to bring my best version of myself to the business, to my family, and to be able to have that space to create and to play. And it all
Yeah.
came from those small moments.
What's why? So, we always we're in a constant barrage of screens, messaging, advertisement, stimulus, just constant, constant, constant. You know what I mean? Especially when you've got a busy life, throwing some kids. It's just everywhere. The digital age we live in. So one is having margin to have that white space in your brain. I'm convinced that's why people, they don't, critical thinking is being eroded. And
Mm-hmm.
even deep thinking, philosophical thinking is being eroded because we constantly stay at the surface, kind of this touch and go
Yeah.
mentality. We don't really dive deep on stuff. So one is having margin in your day to be able to let your brain kind of wander. And then the second thing is you're one question away, asking one question from massive change in your life. My father-in-law says, you either run your business or your business runs you. It's one or the other.
Yep.
And you had that awareness of like, wait a minute, very cool. Very cool. So, okay, in closing here, I got one more question for you. What's been one of the best resources for you in your business development?
Ooh, in my business development, I think I could recommend a book or a podcast. There's so many of them out there. But I think what I'm going to say is actually having this open mind and open heart that you're on this journey for a reason. That's what's brought Julie and me to places that we haven't even foreseen.
Hmm.
And we've worked with a lot of coaches. We've gone to a lot of events. We've met a lot of people. And really, at the heart of it is just being open to where I mentioned early on, I quit my job with no safety net, and the universe was like, I got you.
Yeah.
And we continue to try to bring, the stakes are higher now, but we continue to try to bring that spirit to everything that we do, just trusting that we're on this path for a reason and that we're meant to do something, some great things, I hope,
Mm-hmm.
and that we're meant to help people, and that the right things, those right resources will show up at the right time. And so that's what I would recommend beyond a specific book or a resource, is just to have that open heart and open mind. I'm sure you resonate that with your background in ministry. So
There are some really immutable
yeah.
laws out there.
Mm-hmm.
Even when you begin to set your mind in a certain direction, it is pretty uncanny how opportunity kind of in that vein opens up, and there's a
Yep.
lot of reasons why that, kind of is that way. But being open-minded is huge, to not discount, something.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, I'll add one more. This just came to me. This is unrelated to the open mind, but I think it'll be good
yeah.
based on what we were talking about earlier. It's called the 7 Whys. exercise. You might have
Oh,
talked about it on your show before, but
okay.
in case any listener hasn't heard of it before, if you were looking for, you talked earlier about, you want to be job optional, right?
Yeah.
So this exercise will help you dig into the core beyond the surface level to go all the way down to your deepest level of why.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a very simple exercise. And what you do is you start with the first thing. I would like to be job optional. And then you then frame that as a question. Well, why is being job optional important to you?
Right.
And you say, okay, well, that would give me the freedom to be able to spend time with my kids. Why is it important for you to have the time to spend with your kids? And what happens is the first 2 or 3 layers, very simple. You're
Right.
like, yep, got that dialed in. And then you get down to 5, 6, and it gets harder. And then 7 is nearly impossible
By
because
the
you
end, you're just
have to
staring at a
cut through.
wall and you're like, why are we
Yeah,
here? Why are we even
right.
here?
Yeah. But if you stick with it long enough to break through that wall, you're going to get the most powerful insights from this very simple exercise.
That's really good. That kind of goes back into like, how do you be somebody who thinks critically about stuff and goes deep?
Yeah.
Just asking that question, it forces you to go find answers.
Yeah.
So who knew that real estate and philosophy and the meaning of life are so intertwined? On this episode today, we've shown you the connection between it all. Annie, what would be like the best way that somebody could learn more about Goodegg or follow your guys' success?
The best place to go is our website, goodegginvestments.com. We have a ton of resources there. We're always putting out new blog posts and articles, webinars, podcasts. And of course, if anybody wants to reach out to me personally, I'm just at Annie@goodegginvestments.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today, and we had a great time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Garrett, and to Seth too, who's not here but always present.
Thank you. As always, excited that you joined us for another episode of the Reinvest Podcast. Stay tuned every Tuesday for new episodes. And if you want to learn how you can use your hard-earned capital to diversify into real estate, go to our website, lv5capital.com, and shoot us a message. Move farther, reach higher, and grow deeper. We'll see you next time.